We're ready to start. My name is Natasha Chechik. I'm the Director of Public Affairs at Limmud FSU, and we're very happy to have you all with us today. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our host for today, Limmud FSU President, Mr. Yaron Frenkel. Mr. Frenkel, please.
To you, everybody, and good morning to those which are on the United States from the West Coast. We have the great honor and pleasure to host the chairman of the board of the Jewish Agency, Mr. Herzog. The Jewish Agency was established more than 90 years ago and was basically the government of Israel and the Jewish people before the establishing of the State of Israel. You can find as the leaders of the Jewish Agency in the past names like David Ben-Gurion, Zalman Shazar, Moshe Sharet, Prime Ministers of Israel in later stage, Artur Rupin, very famous name. So today, the chairman and the leader of the Jewish Agency is a friend of Limmud, Mr. Herzog. He was born in 22 September 1960. He was in a position of minister in the governments of Israel in different positions, Minister of Construction, Infrastructure, Minister of Well-being and Social Affairs, Minister of Tourism. He was also the Minister of Diaspora and fighting against anti-Semitism. He was studying in the University of Tel Aviv and University of Cornell, University of New York. He was the chairman of the Labour Party in Israel and the Machaneh HaTzioni, which called in English the Zionist camp. He is a friend and colleague to many of world leaders. During the years, he was born to a famous Chaim and Ora Tibadel Chaim Arukim Herzog. His father was the 6th president of the State of Israel, a famous diplomat, general. He was the representative of Israel for years in the UN. And he's the grandson of the chief rabbi of Israel, Yitzhak Isaac Alevi Herzog. So our great guest today, I will give you the floor. And basically, Yaron Deckel, the journalist Yaron Deckel, will take over this interview with our distinguished guest. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Yaron, and good evening or good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to host this talk with the Jewish Agency Chairman, Mr. Herzog. And since Mr. Herzog, you have the, I think, full information about the Jewish communities around the globe, and we are not over the crisis of the COVID-19 epidemic crisis. I'd like to start with your insight. How do different Jewish communities around the world experience this crisis, which is a major crisis around the world?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Yaron. And thank you, my dear friends leading the Limmud FSU, Matthew Bronfman, Chaim Chesler, and the entire team. We are noticing something new in world Jewry because it's something new in humanity. And when I say something new is what we have in our own recollection the last 100 years. And clearly, this is something that impacts personal, first and foremost, the human beings themselves, then their families, then their communities, their cities and their nations, and the world at large. So clearly, the Jewish people, which are based on communal life of communities is communal life, is on minyan. Is the idea that gathering together gives you certain priorities in front of the Lord Almighty, meaning that you have to have institutionalized community, and institutional community is totally paralyzed. We have communities in the United States who believe that they won't have prayers for the Chagim in September, meaning that what has stopped in many communities around the world is kindergarten, is schools, is congregations, is synagogues, is JCCs, is social services. And this led to enormous strain on Jewish communities around the world, because both the social vibrancy of the community is dependent on it, as well as the ability to fundraise and raise income for the viability of the community. As such, I can go on and on about many communities, but I will just conclude my opening remarks by saying that we, the Jewish Agency, being the biggest Jewish organization in the world, seeing a leadership role for ourselves, we've established immediately a special loan fund for communities in distress without interest, in good terms. We've already distributed up until yesterday $8.3 million to dozens and dozens of communities all around the world who found themselves in total paralysis. And we hope we serve the Grand Jewish Collective in this action.
From your information, talking about the Jewish world, which the communities were that were affected the most?
So first, let's start with Italy as an example, okay? Because Italy was badly stricken by COVID-19 from the onset. And let's just analyze Italy. 22 communities, around 20,000 human beings, Jewish members. Names like Genoa, Livorno, and Venice, which immediately bring about memories of Jewish life and incredible laureates and sages. And of course, Rome and Milan as the big communities. And I vividly remember when I just simply picked up the phone and called Ruth Dargulu, the president of Rome Jewish community, and she basically broke up in tears, saying we've never faced such a situation, except of course in the Holocaust. And indeed, until now, last week we distributed food in that community. And we did also a fundraising within the Israeli society of about 700,000 shekels, which is an example of solidarity which was unknown before. So that community, for example, needed from hygiene products to hotline and social services. From then on, we of course noticed many communities. Take South Africa. South Africa is in dire situation because of the devaluation of the rand, which is dramatic, because of the fact that the community is dwindling, because of the fact that all of the weight of communal life is on their members. Move on to Latin America, where you have communities, small communities from Peru all the way down to Argentina. And of course, in FSU communities, in France communities. And if we look at the issue of casualties, we find out that because of what I said, mifgash, minyan, we had an unproportional number of Jewish mortalities around the world. Take France, for example, 400,000 Jews. It's like 5% of Israeli population. Okay, so in Israel, unfortunately, we had about 290 casualties out of 8 million people. In French Jewish community, out of 400,000 Jews, about between 1,500 to 2,000 Jews passed away in the COVID-19. England, in a given moment, was way above 5% of the entire British population were Jewish mortalities, and so forth and so on. So I think it shook Jewish life dramatically. Also, you see it in the United States. And this poses a huge challenge. How will communities get out of this process? Last week, we convened all major global Jewish organizations and regional, together with the Minister of Diaspora Affairs, Omer Yankelevich, and we've kind of sorted out 5 major pillars of activity that needs to be dealt with in Jewish life today.
What do
One
they
is, pardon?
What
Sorry?
do the community need?
Well, so one is community. How does community function from now on? Two is education. Education is becoming a huge issue. How will you educate, especially when the schools are private schools and tuition, very expensive? Third is, of course, the morale, the hope, the leadership. You need leadership in communities. The fourth, of course, has to do with fundraising. What are the current sources of funding for communities? And finally, before I conclude in my answer, is the issue of security and anti-Semitism. It's all intertwined together.
We will touch the anti-Semitism following the epidemic crisis in a minute or two. But I wonder, Mr. Herzog, if you think the Israeli government should take part in the aid to the Jewish communities, because in the last 70 or 72 years, we know that the solidarity of the Jewish people around the world was with the state of Israel. They supported with the fundraising from different Jewish communities via the Jewish Agency or other ways the state of Israel. Do you think it should go nowadays the other way around, that the Israeli government should support and help the Jewish communities by financial aid, for instance?
Well, I think that this raises a very good question, which is, has the paradigm changed? I think that all in all, Israel has come out of this crisis, or is coming out of this crisis, versus the Jewish world in a very impressive way. Israel is viewed as managing its affairs well. I know that there are always people in Israel who are frustrated, but that's natural. And clearly, you know, each one is close to his own circumstances. So we know that there are issues to deal with in Israel, but all in proportion, Israel is viewed from a bird's eye view as a country that functions well, has a good health system, and is actually strengthening itself in the paradigm, as which you mentioned. The paradigm was always the Jewish world supports Israel in crisis. Well, in this crisis, Israel should extend its hand to the Jewish world. We are discussing it with the Israeli government. As you know, a new government was formed and it doesn't have a budget yet. But we are calling upon the government of Israel to increase its support for Jewish communities abroad. And this global forum, which convened last week, was the first step in this direction.
In a minute, I'll ask you about the anti-Semitism. Is there a rise in the anti-Semitism? But I'd like to give an opportunity to Mr. Aaron Frenkel to raise his own question.
Yeah.
Aaron, please.
Yes. So I thought that this time is an unprecedented time. I mean, a combination of the COVID, Corona, for the different Jewish community and the world as a whole. Then you got the American riots, which of course many communities are suffering. And in certain places, it's coming again and again, the blame that all the blame on the Jews. It reminds me the famous anecdote, the famous joke of a Russian guy meeting his colleague Russian, and he say, "You heard that the Jews are to be blamed for the Titanic also." He say, "What are you talking? Titanic is the iceberg." He say, "I don't care. Iceberg, Eisenberg, Rosenberg, Ehrenberg, all Jews." So, I mean, you have on your head and your past experience fighting anti-Semitism, Minister of Diaspora, all these issues of the Jewish communities around. We have too much on our shoulders, and you as leading the Jewish agency today, how are you coping with it? And I'm repeating what Yaron said, is some extra budget or from government or extra donation that people from the diaspora are pouring into the Jewish agency coffers, or it's difficult situation?
So, wait. Okay. First of all, we predict, like all other Jewish organizations, a certain decline in income. We have to include that in everybody's calculation. We foresee we are dependent on the Jewish support from the major funders of mostly the Jewish Federations of North America, which is our main partner, together with Keren Hayesod, and we foresee a decline in income. And as such, we are trying to convince the Jewish world, which has enough resources despite the crisis, to lend a hand to brothers and sisters around the world. And we are trying to do it. Secondly, we foresee a major shift in summer camps. We had ready 1,500 counselors ready to go to summer camps in North America. We will have summer camps in FSU as well. We hope in the FSU that some of them will still go on, but in North America, they're mostly going to be canceled. And it's a major event in Jewish life in North America, because summer camps are always the pillar of Jewish identity education for the young people. We see clearly a freeze in the immersive experiences in Israel, like Birthright and Masa. We have a few thousand members of Masa here in Israel, and Masa is the first and only organization that received a special visa from the government of Israel to bring more youngsters, but it will take time with travel limitations. But we know that both Birthright is on hold until the third quarter or the fourth quarter of the year. This impacts tremendously our activities. We have shlichim and shinshinim, meaning emissaries, and 18-year-old gap year emissaries to all the way to older emissaries, including emissaries on campuses. The shinshinim we brought back and are planning to try to send at the end of summer. The shlichim, the emissaries we have on the ground, are doing incredible work, including in the FSU, but all over the world, and they became a pillar of social services in many communities. We have the biggest social housing company in the country, Amigur. In that company, we have 8,000 old age Holocaust survivors and FSU Olim, and really, truly, because of excellent management of that team, we had only one corona case, and luckily, no casualties. So the challenges are quite enormous, and I think these challenges are the challenges of any organization, just like yourselves as well. I mean, people trying to see what will be the alternative. Can we use alternatives in Zoom or in other means, and simply wait for the time being changed?
I'd like to touch two issues that might be connected and might not, but I wonder if you see any effect of the world crisis and the Jewish community's crisis, the epidemic crisis. One is the anti-Semitism has changed following the crisis, and the other one is the Aliyah. Do you anticipate a growth of newcomers, Olim, to Israel because of the epidemic crisis?
Absolutely, yes. And we project a sharp rise in Aliyah. And we see already the amount of applications and contacts and phone calls to our global center, which operates 24/7. And we see 40 to 50% rise from English-speaking countries, 70% in France, and of course, for many other countries. Last year, 2019, was a blessed year of 35,000 Olim. We project, if, assuming things are as they are, even a rise to 250,000 new immigrants in the next 3 to 5 years. So it's a very substantial issue. We are speaking with the new Minister of Absorption, Tina Tamano-Shata, so that the government come forward and deal with us on a national plan for absorbing Aliyah. And this is a very major challenge of ours. Parallel to that, and not irrespective of that, we assume a rise in anti-Semitism. We see a clear rise in anti-Semitism all over the world, especially on social networks, because it's always easy, as just Aaron just mentioned, to blame the Jews for everything that goes on. So at first it was the Chinese, but after things relaxed, the Jews are out there as always the scapegoat. And we see, we saw after Brooklyn, terrible anti-Semitism on the web by white supremacists. We saw desecration of synagogues. Last week in Los Angeles, we had in Alabama, in Canada, in the Ukraine. We have anti-Semitic events. We saw in New York. So we just know it's there. It doesn't mean that Aliyah is because of that. Aliyah will first and foremost be because people wanted and were thinking of Aliyah, and all of a sudden, as they are in lockdown and closure, say to themselves, you know what, I'd like to change and move to my ancient homeland. So that's the way we see it. We are speaking to Olim, and we see the Aliyah went on throughout the COVID-19. We had about 1,200 Olim from 15 countries who came in and then were immediately quarantined for 2 weeks. And it's not easy at all to make Aliyah immediately be quarantined, but that's the way it is.
It's also because of the health system in Israel, which is well known about being a very good and effective health system. Is it? Do they take it?
I can assume that it's also part of that. It's also the relative good quality of life in Israel. It's all combined. Israel has a good health system, and people are impressed with it. But I wouldn't say it's the only reason. Yeah. I think it's always a combination of reasons.
You mentioned the anti-Semitism, and I wonder, Mr. Herzog, how does the Jewish agency works and helps to secure Jewish communities around the world, if at all?
So look, first of all, I always say when I go into my office in Jerusalem, it's the room where David Ben-Gurion sat in and from where he led our nation to independence. And there were always major challenges that these walls heard and faced throughout our history. And including, by the way, major challenges in bringing Jews to Israel too. But now, following the massacre in Toulouse, in a school in Toulouse in France in 2012, my predecessor, Natan Sharansky, formed a fund, Security Assistance Fund, which is basically a fund that helps Jewish institutions with their installations in security, and we've helped over 600 institutions. So last year in Yom Kippur in Halle, Germany, a small Jewish community of many people from the FSU, they were davening in Yom Kippur, and a white supremacist terrorist, racist terrorist, tried to break in while broadcasting live on the social networks that he wants to kill the Jews, and he couldn't break in because of the equipment that we've installed. And this literally saved 55 Jews. So we definitely are approached by many communities to make sure that they have the right equipment to defend themselves, but at the end, it also has to do with local government, police, and security officers, including the Jewish community security services all over the world.
I wonder, two last questions, if I may. First of all, sure. What is, in your eyes, the major challenge, if you can point one, the major challenge of Jewish communities in the months or the weeks to come?
Okay, so before the COVID-19, my picture, the reason that I came into this position is, of course, my fear that the Jewish people will suffer a major divide because of the different attitudes to Judaism around the world, especially in between Israel and North America. I think now the major challenge is the ability of communities to function, to have the ability to pick up and reignite, and then find ways and means to talk to each other and with Israel in the center, because their center of attention will be mostly internal. And because the world has changed for, let's say, you know, we can assume that at least for a year, it's not going to be so easy both to travel and etc. How do we make sure that we have enough content to supply that will keep people involved in Jewish life? Because it's very easy to be locked in your home and forget about your Jewish identity or your kids not knowing. So we are looking for ways and means how to supply that to communities so that they can use it to keep themselves going.
The last question, Mr. Herzog, you mentioned in your opening remarks that there is a new government in Israel. We all know it. We followed the last 3 elections in a row in the last 18 months or so. And we all know that you were one of the leading supporters of national unity government in the past. I believe right now too. If not, please correct me. And I wonder if you can help us understand how long this government will survive, knowing that it was a kind of I will say, a marriage with no happiness between the partners.
Look, I think that at times there's no choice but to go together, because we don't have the privilege of dividing our nation. I know it's very difficult. These are very difficult circumstances, and one can definitely understand all views of the spectrum. But in the current situation, once the government has been formed, I hope it will deliver certain actions that will make a difference. First and foremost, meeting the challenge of the corona. Secondly, stabilizing the internal situation and dealing with some of the security issues that are out there as well. But in terms of the Jewish world, I really, truly hope that this government will put the Jewish nation issue on its agenda. I've been trying to do that with all the relevant ministers, and hope that there will be certain backing to the fact that if we are the nation state of the Jewish people, we should definitely show it in merits and deeds as well.
Will it survive for long, the government?
I don't know. There's a lot of ego and there's a lot of spins.
Yes.
I think it has a chance to survive. It depends on the daily and weekly agendas. I'm not a prophet. I hope it will, because we cannot afford ourselves another round.
Well, Mr. Herzog, I'd like to thank you very much for your time, and give Mr. Aaron Frenkel the lead right now to conclude the session, please.
So, thank you very much, Mr. Yitzhak Herzog. Was clear and loud. We're always happy to hear you. You cover most of the things in these difficult days, and we appreciate you give us from your precious time. And we wish you great success at the Jewish Agency and everything you're doing for Israel and for the Jewish Jewry around the world. Thank you again, and I want to add some thanks to our partners, Matthew Bronfman, which is on the line from New York, Sandra Khan, the founder. Matthew is the chairman of the board, and Sandra is the co-founder together with Chaim Chesler, which is here in Israel. And thank you very much for Yaron Deckel, which volunteered to do this interview. Thank you for Natasha Chechik, which is on the orchestra of these events. Thank you, all of you, and see you in the next Limmud session with the Minister Elkin next Sunday, same time.
Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.